Today we're starting with Psalm 63. O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee, in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. Again, a whole psalm about how we can thirst for God. And again, a very emotive psalm. A lot of the Old Testament is about how to please God and what to do for God, and here's all the rules, and here's his values. And yet here is a man who's hungry for the presence of God. And many times we forget to hunger for the presence of God. My soul will be satisfied with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. The idea that I'm thinking about God and I'm meditating about God. He is in my thoughts, his character, his moods, his expressions, his views, his personality, his power, his strength, his majesty, his might, his purposes. When we're just concentrating on him and not what we're going to get out of it, or how all the theological ducks are in a row and all of these things. Many people are spending a lot of time learning about God, but not spending time with God. And here's a psalm about a soul who's thirsty for the presence of God, not just the knowledge of God, but thirsty for the presence of God. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand holdeth me up. Those who seek my soul to destroy it, they shall go into the lower parts. They shall fall by the sword. But the king shall rejoice in God. Everyone that sweareth by him shall glory, and the mouth of them that speak lies will be stopped. Glorying after God, purposing for God, not just what he brings to the equation, but who he is. And so here we have a thirsty soul for God. And if you're thirsty, this is a good psalm to read and meditate and think about, and join in with the psalmist who is hungry for his God. Going back, the interesting thing about doing these videos is, yesterday I felt like I got a little tongue-tied when I was going through chapter 11 about the people murmuring and complaining and what God did then. I looked down and started reading one side of the page instead of the other. The sequence of events, to clear that up, is the people were complaining, and God was getting angry, and he did kill some of them for their complaints. And he said it's the mixed multitude that are there, and the children of Israel started lusting. They were remembering eating flesh. And if you remember, most of what they were eating today was manna. Every day was manna. If you want, and maybe they had some meat, maybe they had some, some sheep, that kind of thing. But the idea of having a very wide variety of foods, they started remembering the onions and the leeks and the fish and all these, how wonderful it was. The lusting here isn't just sexual lusting, it's lusting of your physical appetite, of your wants, your needs, your remembrances. And they wanted to go back to Egypt. He had given them this manna to gather every day and twice on the sixth day. And for them, it wasn't good enough, and they started complaining. And he had sent them quail at the same time he sent manna. This was back right before they got to Sinai. They started complaining, and he gave them manna and gave them quail. Well, here they're complaining, and they want flesh to eat. And Moses is starting to get upset because how can I handle millions of people? I need help. They're wearying me. And God wants to also break in and destroy them, but he's also standing in the gap for the people. And how should I give flesh to these? For they weep to me, saying, give us flesh that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people. And so Moses calls out 70 men, and he gives them the spirit of Moses, the same soft spirit, the same stoic spirit, the same gentleness, but purpose, so that these 70 might help him in dealing with these rebellious Israelites and the mixed multitudes. And he says, you want quail? This time I'm going to give you quail. I'm going to give you quail that you eat constantly for a month. You're going to get so sick of it, it's going to come out your nose. It's going to, you're just going to throw it up. And so even Moses was wondering, well, how are you going to feed this multitude? And I'm still remembering of that verse that says, is the Lord's hands too short? So he sends this. First he has the men, they have the spirit, and they start prophesying. And again, the prophecy here isn't coming up with strange words and blathering words, or speaking in the spirit and slaying in the spirit and talking in tongues and all this. If you talk about what God's going to do, what he's doing, what he has done, that's prophesying. We Christians do prophesy in a sense every time we talk about the coming of Christ and how he's going to call the nations together. When we talk about how he's going to judge the quick and the dead, how there's going to be a judgment seat, that's all prophecy. We are prophesying. This didn't come from our minds. This came from the Bible. So we have these prophets, but the people that were eating this food got sick, and some of them died because God sent the plague. I suggested the plague might have been something like salmonella, or some type of testicle thing. But the plague, whether it came from the bad food or not, it came from God, purposed because of the people. And he says here in 20, but even for a whole month I will give this to you. It will be loathsome unto you because you have despised the Lord. It isn't just they had a need, they despised the Lord and what he had provided. When we look at 12, we also get Miriam and Aaron going against Moses about who's in authority. And we'll see that later with the Korah rebellion. They don't like that Moses had married an Ethiopian woman. And then they said, hath the Lord also indeed spoken only by Moses, but has he also spoken by us? And the Lord heard it. So you have to remember that God hears. He says, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Is he spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the answer is no. God comes and he comes and defends himself, because this is his prophet. He goes, if there was a prophet among you, I, the Lord, would make myself known to him in a vision and speak to him in dreams, but not so with Moses. I speak to him face to face, mouth to mouth, not in dark speeches or the similitude of the Lord. Therefore, were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Weren't you afraid to speak against my mouthpiece, my friend, the one who is speaking for me? And so he gives Miriam leprosy, and Moses and Aaron go running to her aid. And God says, well, if someone had spit on her face like her father, wouldn't she be unclean for 7 days? So she had to stay outside of the camp, unclean for 7 days till the leprosy passed. At this time, in 13, they called together the spies, and this is the beginning of a push for the Holy Land. And you have the list of the 12 men, one from each tribe that went out. And we do have Judah. Tribe of Judah was Caleb. The tribe of Ephraim was Hoshea, which is named Joshua by Moses. And we had 12 other men who went in with their listed. And they went in to spy out the land and see if it was the good land. Look at how the cities, look at how everything is being done. Look and see what kind of provision is there, grapes and fruits and all these things. So they go in and they search the land out for 40 days. And for 40 days they're in there, and when they return, they're saying how fruitful it was, how wonderful the land was, everything's great. And as you know, Caleb and Joshua are all about, let's go take it. God has given it to us. We will be able to overcome. These people are our bread. We'll be able to take this. But the other 10 say no, because they're giants. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. And he talks the people away from following God. And in 14, there's rebellion. They start pulling away. They turn away. Even Joshua and Caleb are trying to implore them that if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into land and give us this land that flows with milk and honey. They're even quoting God back to the people in prophecy here, saying this is truly a land of milk and honey. The Lord is with us, fear them not. But the congregation wanted to stone them, and the Lord got mad, which is understandable. And he even thinks about wiping them out again, but Moses intercedes and talks about how that, well, you can't do this because the nations will say that you only brought them out here to destroy them. They will think that you don't have an arm strong enough to bring them in. It won't look good for you or the reputation that you're trying to have. So he speaks on God's behalf to God. And he asks to pardon their iniquity according to your mercy. You are a merciful God. You pardon their iniquity. So the Lord says, I have pardoned them according to your word. He says that they had 10 times they hadn't hearkened to his voice. We don't see 10 examples here. There are 10 times that God had called them to do something and they had pushed back. Most of us wouldn't be that patient. But here he was. And he says that only Joshua and Caleb will go into the promised land. Anybody 20 years old and older that could have gone to war, that entire generation will now die out. It's the very children that they were afraid that would die in taking the land. It's the very children of these just generation who will go into the land. And so he tells them that they're going to have to bear this iniquities 40 years. And so I, the Lord, have said this: I will surely do this unto this evil congregation that has gathered themselves against me. So they gathered themselves against the Lord. And Moses tells them this, but then they decide, well, okay, no, we're sorry, we're going to go in now. And Moses is like, no, it's too late. The Lord is not with you. But they don't agree. And so they try to go in, and they, of course, they presumed to go in, and that was in 44, that they presumed to go in the hilltop. Nevertheless, the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses departed not out of the camp. God was not with them, but they went in, and the Amalekites came down, and the Canaanites dwelled in the hill and smote them. So God was not with them. He was their strength. He was their sword. He was their mighty one. First they were afraid to go with him. Now they should have been afraid to go without him, but they were okay to go without him. We'll go now. No, it's too late. Now that the blessing is off the table. And so in 15, we have them talking about offerings that are made. And here they are talking about the different offerings that are coming in when you make vows and burnt offerings and sacrifices. Well, they're repeating this again. They're going over how you're doing this. Once again, when you get into the land, when you're going to make offerings, make sure that you're doing this correctly. And it says, all of those that are born in the country shall do these things after this manner, and offerings shall be made by fire of a sweet savor. If a stranger sojourn with you, and whosoever is among your generations, and make an offering to a sweet savor, one ordinance shall be for the congregation, and one also for the stranger. And he's repeating many of these laws because they're going to be going in. But again, they're going to be going in 38. So we see them going through the motions of preparing, but it's going to be a long wait now. There's offerings made for unintentional sins. Again, he's covering the fact that now that they're going to be out here a while, there'll be unintentional sins. Here's how you do some burnt offerings for those. And he says, but the soul that does aught presumptuously, whether it's born of the land or a stranger, that soul shall be cut off from his people. There is one law that sinneth through ignorance, both of them born of the children of Israel and the stranger. But if you do things on purpose, if you're purposed about it, see, this is for this whole law is for when you do things unintentionally. But if you purposely do many things like breaking Sabbath or many of these other things, you shall be cast out, and some of them you will lose your life. But because if you despise the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that soul shall utterly be cut off. It's again, he does not want his word despised. Unintentionally doing something wrong and doing a sin is one thing. He also goes in and talks about this one person who was a Sabbath breaker. He was picking up sticks on the Sabbath, which he was told not to do. You get the idea that he wasn't picking it up just to make a fire for that time. It was his job. You know, he's picking up sticks to sell. That was his merchandise. And so they put him in a ward, which again, we see the beginnings of a jail here. We did this one time before with the young man that had cursed God, and they brought out the elders, and they judged and found out he had indeed cursed God, and they put him in a ward, this early kind of jail cell thing. And they made him in this ward, and the Lord said, surely he should be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him without the camp, because he purposely broke the law of God, knowing that it was the Sabbath and that he should not be doing this. He also wants to do something to help them to remember the word, so they would put fringes on their garments. When they looked down and saw this little fringe that came down off the sides, when they saw the fringe, that would remind them of the commandments of the Lord. The Lord is doing everything here to make sure that these people remember him, remember his laws. And he wants to be their God. He wants to be in their camp, but he cannot deal with sin. He cannot deal with unrighteousness. He cannot deal with purpose, neglect of his word. So he's doing this that they might remember and be holy unto your God. The idea of being holy is doing things God's way. And he wants them to find out what God's way is. And again, he ends the chapter with, I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Remember, we said several times that when you see that I am the Lord your God, that is a stamp of importance. Stop and remember that circle, that star, I am the Lord. This thing that comes before this is important because I am the Lord. So going through this is very interesting, and some of it's well known to some of us. We're back into the narrative now. Tomorrow we go talking about the Korah rebellion. But just to see how God is setting this up, how he's been working through this, how he's been setting up the tabernacle and the priest and the laws and all the stuff that I've mentioned, it all tends to build and move and go forward. And even when they're being sinful, you see this progression, this push of God to fulfill his promises. The promises he's made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and then that promise was handed to the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's very important here. God keeps his promise, and he will not break his promise. Even though these people have gotten so bad and had rejected him and despised him, he did not break his promises. We have a promise-keeping God. Thank you.